The glass doors of the downtown bank slid open, and a woman stepped inside with calm confidence. Her heels clicked softly against the polished floor, and her presence made a few heads turn. She wasn't dressed in glitter or jewels, but there was something about her, something sharp in her eyes and steady in her walk that carried quiet authority. Her name was Angela Carter, and she was one of the youngest black CEOs in the city. Angela had built her company from the ground up. Years ago, she had started with a small office, a tiny staff, and endless nights of struggle. Now she led hundreds of employees, ran multi-million-dollar contracts, and was respected across the industry. She wasn't just a CEO in title. She was a leader who had fought for every inch of her success. On this ordinary afternoon, Angela wasn't there to attend a meeting or negotiate a deal. She had come to the bank on a personal errand. She needed to make a withdrawal, something simple, something routine. It was her own account, her own money. She had done it before. She expected nothing more than a quick signature, a short wait, and a polite smile from the teller. She walked up to the counter and greeted the young teller with a calm smile. "Good afternoon," she said, sliding her withdrawal slip forward. The teller looked at her ID, glanced at the slip, and then hesitated. Angela noticed the hesitation, the slight wrinkle of the teller's brow, but she ignored it. It wasn't unusual for staff to double-check big transactions. The bank was busy that day. Customers lined up behind her, some shifting impatiently, some staring curiously. The hum of voices and the faint tapping of keyboards filled the air. Yet, in the middle of all that noise, Angela began to feel something different in energy, an uneasiness. The teller whispered something to a colleague, then disappeared to the back. Angela stood still, her bag resting lightly against her arm. She was used to waiting. Her career had been full of long waits, waiting for investors to return calls, waiting for clients to sign contracts, waiting for people to finally see her worth. But this wait felt strange. The whispers, the glances, the slight stiffness in the air. Minutes passed. The teller returned, not with cash, but with the branch manager walking beside her. The man was middle-aged, with a stiff tie and a forced smile that looked more like a smirk. He approached Angela slowly, scanning her up and down in a way that wasn't professional. It was dismissive, like someone trying to measure her worth with his eyes. "Ma'am," he began, his voice polite but edged with doubt. "We're having some trouble verifying this transaction." Angela tilted her head slightly. "Trouble," she repeated calmly. "This is my account." "Yes," the manager replied quickly, "but large withdrawals require extra verification. We just need to be sure everything is in order." It wasn't his words that stung. It was his tone, the unspoken assumption buried beneath it. The way he lingered on, sure. The way his eyes narrowed, as though she was someone trying to take what wasn't hers. Angela handed him her ID again. "Everything is in order. I've been a client here for years." "Check again." The manager took the card, glanced at it, and then at her, and Angela could see the doubt written all over his face. He didn't see her as a successful CEO. He didn't see her as a long-time client. He didn't even see her as someone who had earned her money with hard work. To him, in that moment, she was just another face he didn't trust. Customers behind her shifted, sensing the tension. Some frowned, others pretended not to notice. The air felt heavier now, as if everyone could sense that what was happening was no simple verification. Angela stayed still, her back straight, her voice calm. She had been through worse. She had walked into boardrooms where no one believed in her, stood at podiums where people doubted every word she spoke. But every time she had stood tall, yet inside something was boiling. This wasn't just a delay. This wasn't just procedure. This was disrespect, public, sharp, humiliating disrespect. And the worst part? It was happening in the very place where she had trusted her money, her security, her name. The manager sighed. handing her ID back. "I'm sorry, but we can't process this request right now." Angela's hand tightened around her purse. She looked at him steadily, her silence sharper than any words. Around them, the whispers grew louder. A woman gasped quietly. A man shook his head in disbelief. The CEO who had commanded boardrooms, who had led hundreds, who had built her empire with fire in her heart, was now being denied a simple withdrawal at her own bank. And in that moment, Angela Carter understood two things very clearly. One, she would not accept this insult quietly. And two, the man standing in front of her had just made the worst mistake of his career. Because in 1 minute, the balance of power would shift. Angela Carter stood at the counter. Her ID and withdrawal slip still in her hand. The branch manager's words echoed in the air like an insult wrapped in politeness. "We can't process this request right now." The sentence hit harder than expected, not because it was loud, but because of the way it was delivered: flat, dismissive, final. It wasn't an explanation. It was a wall. Angela's calm eyes scanned the man's face. He looked away quickly, pretending to check something on his clipboard. She had seen that look before, in different rooms, on different faces. It was the look of someone who had already judged her before she even opened her mouth. Her voice was steady when she spoke. "This is my account. I've withdrawn from here many times. What exactly is the issue?" The manager didn't answer right away. Instead, he gave her the kind of smile that wasn't a smile at all, thin, tight, condescending. "It's just unusual, that's all. A withdrawal of this size. We need to be certain." Angela didn't flinch. "You already have my ID. You have my signature. Everything is in your system. What more certainty do you need?" Behind her, a few customers had stopped pretending to be busy. A middle-aged woman clutched her handbag tighter, leaning forward to listen. A man in a business suit raised his eyebrows, clearly intrigued. The hum of the bank's background noise, keyboards, footsteps, printers seemed to dim. Under the weight of the growing tension, the manager shifted uncomfortably but tried to keep control. "It's just policy. We can't release funds without extra verification." Angela's gaze sharpened. Policy or assumption? For a second, the man froze. His smile faltered. His eyes darted away. Angela knew she had struck the truth. It wasn't policy. It was prejudice. She had come to withdraw her own money. The money she had worked for, earned with years of sweat and sacrifice. Yet here she was, treated like a stranger, like a criminal trying to steal. Angela took a slow breath. She could feel the old memories pressing against her chest, memories of being told she wasn't fit for leadership, of clients doubting her capability, of investors questioning if she could handle responsibility. Every slight, every dismissal, every no delivered with hidden prejudice. And now it was happening again. But this time, she wasn't a hopeful entrepreneur. She wasn't a silent worker waiting for approval. She was a CEO. She had power, influence, and authority. And she wasn't about to let this moment pass quietly. The manager leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Look, if you can't prove more clearly that this is really your account, I'm afraid there's nothing I can do." Angela blinked slowly. "Prove," she repeated. Her tone was calm, but underneath was steel. "I just handed you government-issued ID, an account number, and a signature. What exactly do you expect me to prove?" The man didn't answer. Instead, he shrugged, as if this was the end of the conversation. "I'm sorry, but we can't move forward today." The words fell heavy across the room. Denied. Just like that. A quiet gasp came from the line behind her. Someone whispered, "But that's not right." "That's her ID." Phones began to tilt in her direction. A few customers subtly started recording. Sensing that something unusual, something unfair was unfolding before their eyes. Angela felt her heartbeat quicken. But her face remained calm. Years of leadership had trained her to never show fear, never show weakness. She adjusted her blazer, lifted her chin, and looked the manager directly in the eyes. "Let me be clear," she said, her voice carrying across the counter. "This is my account. That is my money. And you are refusing me without reason." The room went silent. Even the typing from the desks behind the counter stopped. The manager shifted nervously now, his earlier arrogance beginning to crack. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. He had pushed too far, underestimated too greatly. And the woman standing before him wasn't just another customer. She was someone who knew exactly how much power she carried. Angela stepped back slightly, her hand brushing against her phone. She didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to threaten. She knew the moment she made the call, everything would change. The first refusal had already been made. And with it, the first crack in the manager's career had appeared. He didn't know it yet, but in 1 minute, his downfall would begin. Angela Carter stood tall at the counter, her ID still in her hand, her calm eyes fixed on the branch manager. The refusal had been delivered, cold and final. But now the atmosphere inside the bank was shifting. The air felt heavier, like a storm building right above their heads. The manager adjusted his tie nervously. But instead of softening, his tone hardened. It was as though he wanted to prove something not just about bank policy, but about himself. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. But everyone nearby could hear. "Look, ma'am," he said with a thin smile. "We see all kinds of people coming in here claiming to own accounts they don't. You understand, right? We can't just hand out cash because someone says it belongs to them." Angela's eyes narrowed. All kinds of people. The phrase wasn't casual. It was laced with something bitter, something she had tasted before in different forms, in different places. She answered evenly. "I didn't claim. I showed you my ID. I gave you my signature. My name is on that account. You have everything you need." But the manager shook his head slowly, as if speaking to a child who didn't understand. "Yes, but anyone can make things look official. You'd be surprised how many people try to fool us." His words carried louder than he realized. People in the line behind Angela shifted, whispering. One man frowned and muttered under his breath, "That's not right." A young woman pulled out her phone, pretending to scroll. But her camera was clearly pointed toward the scene. Angela noticed the stares, but she didn't move. She wasn't embarrassed for herself, she was angry for the principle of it. The disrespect wasn't hidden anymore. It was out in the open, spreading across the room like wildfire. Still, she kept her voice calm. "So what exactly are you saying?" "That my ID is fake. That my account isn't real." The manager straightened his shoulders, puffing himself up in false authority. "I'm saying you don't look like the kind of person who'd own this account." The words hit the room like a slap. A gasp came from somewhere in the line. A woman whispered, "Did he just say that?" Heads turned sharply, eyes wide. The disrespect was no longer subtle. It was naked, unmasked, and cruel. Angela's jaw tightened, but she didn't flinch. She had faced disrespect before, but hearing it out loud in front of strangers inside her own bank was a wound that burned deeper than she expected. Still, she wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her shaken. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes locked on his. "And what kind of person do you think owns it?" The manager blinked. For the first time, he seemed uncertain. But instead of retreating, he doubled down. His arrogance wouldn't let him back away. "Not someone like this," he said vaguely, gesturing at her with a dismissive wave of his hand. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the tellers behind the counter froze. their fingers hovering above keyboards, their eyes darting nervously between Angela and their boss. They knew he had crossed a line. Everyone knew. Angela exhaled slowly, steadying herself. In that moment, she wasn't just standing for herself. She was standing for every time someone had been dismissed, doubted, or denied because of how they looked, where they came from, or who they were. She spoke softly, but her words carried weight. "You've made a mistake." The manager smirked, mistaking her calm for surrender. "If you can't prove more, I'm afraid this conversation is over." Angela slipped her ID back into her wallet, her movements deliberate, unhurried. Then she pulled out her phone, her thumb gliding over the screen with ease. The manager chuckled under his breath, shaking his head as if she were wasting his time. But behind him, the younger teller looked uneasy. She knew something he didn't. She had seen the way Angela carried herself. The quiet confidence of someone who didn't bluff. The customers could feel it too. A shift. The calm before something big. Angela didn't raise her voice. She didn't threaten. She simply made a call. Her tone was steady, professional. The tone of someone used to giving instructions and being obeyed. Double quotes, "Yes, it's me," she said into the phone. "I'm at the downtown branch. I'm being denied access to my own funds. Send someone now." The manager's smirk faltered. His eyes narrowed. For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed his face. Angela ended the call and slid the phone back into her bag. Then she looked at him again, her gaze unshaken. "1 minute," she said quietly. No one spoke after that. The customers stared, sensing that something extraordinary was about to happen. The manager shifted uncomfortably, tugging at his tie. The arrogance that had fueled him minutes ago now sat uneasily on his shoulders. The rising disrespect had reached its peak. What he thought was control was about to collapse. And the man who believed he held power over Angela Carter was about to learn how wrong he truly was. Asterisk, the bank had fallen into an uneasy silence. Customers no longer shuffled impatiently in line. They stood rooted in place, their eyes fixed on Angela Carter and the arrogant branch manager. Even the hum of printers and clicking keyboards seemed to stop, as if the entire building was waiting for what would happen next. Angela stood calm. But inside, she felt the fire burning hotter. Her call had been short, precise, powerful. She knew help was on the way. She didn't need to shout or argue. Time would do the work for her. But the manager, blind to the storm approaching, still thought he had the upper hand. He crossed his arms, lips curling into a smug smile. "Look, ma'am, I don't want to embarrass you, but this is going nowhere. Unless you can provide stronger proof, I won't approve this withdrawal." Angela raised an eyebrow. "Stronger proof? I've given you government ID, my account details, my signature. What else do you expect?" The manager leaned closer, lowering his voice to a mocking whisper. Something convincing. That single phrase cut sharper than a knife. Around them, people exchanged shocked looks. A man near the front muttered, "She already gave him everything. What more does he want?" A woman clutched her phone, whispering, "This is unbelievable." Angela didn't flinch. Instead, she opened her bag and carefully laid her business card on the counter. The card gleamed under the lights, embossed with her name, Angela Carter, CEO. She slid it toward him. Convincing enough? The manager picked it up, glanced at it, then smirked as if it meant nothing. He placed it back down slowly, his eyes full of arrogance. Anyone can print a card these days. Gasps rippled across the room. Even the younger teller at the counter looked stunned, her hands frozen above the keyboard. She knew the weight of that card, the kind of person who carried one like it. Angela stayed steady, her voice low but firm. "And my ID, and my account number, and my years of being a client here?" The manager shrugged carelessly, as if brushing away her existence. It doesn't add up. Something feels off. Until I'm satisfied, you're not touching this money. The disrespect was no longer rising. It was overflowing. It dripped from his tone, his smirk, the dismissive wave of his hand. He wasn't just questioning her account. He was questioning her right to belong. Her right to command respect. Her right to exist in that space with authority. Angela straightened her shoulders. She didn't need to argue. She knew what was coming. But the customers behind her weren't as patient. Voices began to rise. She's showing everything. What else do you need? This is discrimination. You can't just deny her like that. The manager turned sharply toward them, his smugness cracking for the first time. This is none of your concern, he barked. Bank policies are private matters. Stay out of it. But the crowd wasn't quieting down. Phones were up, recording every second, their little red lights blinking like witnesses in the dark. What had started as a quiet humiliation was now becoming a public reckoning. Angela watched it unfold with calm eyes. She had no need to raise her voice. We're speaking for her now. The truth was too obvious, too loud to be ignored. Still, the manager tried to maintain his false authority. He leaned in once more, lowering his tone, though it still carried across the tense room. I'm warning you, he said. If you keep pushing this, it won't end well for you. Angela's lips curved into the faintest smile. It wasn't amusement, it was certainty. She had seen men like him before, clinging to control they didn't truly own. Her reply was soft, but every syllable struck like thunder. No, it won't end well for you. The words hung in the air. A chill ran through the room. The manager blinked, confused, trying to read her face. But all he saw was unshakable confidence. And then, as if on cue, the glass doors of the bank slid open again. A new figure stepped inside sharp suit, commanding stride, eyes scanning the room like a hawk. The regional director, the customers gasped. The staff stiffened. And the manager's smirk finally cracked. Angela didn't move. She didn't need to. The tension had built to its breaking point, and now the cracks were wide open. The man who thought he could deny her was about to face the weight of his own arrogance. The storm had arrived. The sliding doors closed behind the regional director with a quiet hiss. The sound was small, but in that heavy room, it felt louder than thunder. Every head in the bank turned. Conversations died. Even the beeping of a printer in the back seemed to stop. The man who entered carried himself differently than the branch staff. His suit was sharp, his walk firm, his gaze scanning the room like a commander stepping onto a battlefield. His eyes locked on Angela, then flicked briefly toward the branch manager, double quotes, Ms. Carter. He asked, his voice low but firm. Angela gave the slightest nod. Calm, steady. She didn't need to announce who she was. The weight of her silence spoke for her. The regional director's face tightened. He turned sharply toward the branch manager, who was now fidgeting behind the counter, his earlier arrogance draining like sand through a sieve. What's going on here? The director demanded. The manager straightened, trying to regain composure. Just routine verification, sir. Nothing serious. This customer was attempting a large withdrawal, and I needed to be cautious. The words stumbled out, weak and flimsy. Customers who had been watching the entire scene burst into murmurs. Phones recorded every shaky syllable. Angela didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Her silence was louder than his excuses. The regional director's eyes narrowed. He looked at the young teller, whose face was pale with unease. Is that true? The teller hesitated, glancing nervously at Angela, then back at the director. Finally, she shook her head. No, sir. She gave her ID, the account matches. Everything was correct. Mr. Thompson, She nodded slightly toward the manager, refused anyway. The air snapped like a whip. Gasps echoed through the bank. The truth had cracked the manager's flimsy defense wide open. Angela's gaze remained fixed on him, calm but piercing. The same eyes she had used in boardrooms to silence investors who doubted her, to cut through arrogance dressed as expertise. Now those eyes held him frozen. The manager tried again, his voice desperate. "You don't understand. It just didn't feel right. I was protecting the bank. Protecting the bank." The regional director cut in, his tone sharp as glass. From its own client, from its own CEO. The words slammed into the room like a hammer. The crowd gasped louder. The phones tilted higher. And the manager's face went white as chalk. CEO. The word hung in the air, unmistakable. Undeniable, the manager stammered, CCEO. His voice cracked, thin and trembling. You can't mean, but the truth was already out. The young teller nodded. Customers whispered fiercely. Everyone now understood what the arrogant man had failed to see from the start. The woman he had dismissed, doubted and humiliated, was not just another client. She was the one person he should never have crossed. Angela finally spoke. Her voice was calm, soft even, but every ear in the room strained to hear. "You refused me at my own bank. You insulted me in front of my clients, my staff, and strangers. You looked at me and decided I didn't belong." Her words fell like stones, heavy and unshakable. The manager opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He looked smaller now, shrinking under the weight of the truth. The regional director turned to Angela. His posture had changed, now rigid with respect. "Ms. Carter, I assure you, this will be handled immediately." Angela gave a single nod. Then, for the first time, she looked directly at the man who had caused it all. Her expression was unreadable, her tone quiet but final. "Mr. Thompson," she said, "you're done here." The silence that followed was thunderous. Customers gasped, some even clapped softly. The staff froze, their eyes wide with shock. The manager stumbled back as if the ground had been pulled from under him. Angela didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her words were judgment. Her calmness was the gavel dot in that instant. The power had shifted completely. The man who once mocked her stood stripped of authority, stripped of his arrogance, stripped of his position. And he knew everyone knew that nothing he said could undo it. Angela picked up her card, slid her ID back into her bag, and stood with quiet dignity. "Now," she said simply, "let's finish my withdrawal." The regional director nodded quickly, motioning to the teller. Of course, immediately. The turning point had arrived. The manager's downfall had begun, and Angela hadn't needed to fight with fists or fury. She had only needed to stand, and the lesson was already echoing through the room. True power does not shout, it reveals itself in silence. In dignity, in unshakable certainty. Asterisk, the word done still echoed through the air like a bell tolling the end of a reign. Customers whispered fiercely. Staff members froze, and the branch felt as though time had stopped. The man who had smirked minutes ago now stood pale and trembling, his authority collapsing in front of strangers, colleagues, and his superior. Angela didn't need to repeat herself. She had spoken once, and that was enough. The regional director turned sharply toward the manager, his face tight with anger and disbelief. "Mr. Thompson," he said coldly, "step into my office. Now." But the office wasn't where the judgment would happen. It was happening already out here, under the fluorescent lights, in front of customers holding phones high, recording every second. The humiliation wasn't private anymore. It was public, and it was permanent. The manager opened his mouth, stammering. "Sir, please." "I was only following," the regional director cut him off sharply. "Following what? Policy or prejudice?" The words sliced through the tension. Customers gasped. The staff behind the counter exchanged uneasy glances. They had seen the truth unfold, seen how Angela had been dismissed, insulted, and denied despite presenting every proof required. And now their leader was cornered with no escape. Angela stood quietly, her eyes steady, her hands resting on the counter. She didn't gloat, didn't smirk. Her silence was more powerful than any argument. It told the world, I don't need to raise my voice. Justice is already speaking for me. The regional director turned back to Angela, his voice soft with respect. Ms. Carter, I apologize on behalf of this branch. What happened here is unacceptable. Your withdrawal will be processed immediately, and I assure you this will not be ignored. Angela gave a small nod. See that it isn't. The teller scrambled to fulfill the request, her hands shaking as she counted the bills. The room was still hushed, but the whispers carried like sparks in dry grass. Customers leaned into one another, murmuring words like CEO, discrimination, fired. The story was already spreading before Angela even stepped out the door. The manager stood frozen, his lips trembling, his face drained of color. He had thought himself powerful in that moment, denying a woman what was rightfully hers. But power built on arrogance is fragile. And in less than a minute, it had shattered. The regional director's voice was cold steel. Mr. Thompson, hand over your badge and keys. The gasp that swept the bank was sharp and collective. Customers straightened, staff widened their eyes. It was happening now, swift, undeniable consequences. The manager's fingers shook as he fumbled for his badge. He looked around desperately, hoping someone might defend him, but no one moved. The customers looked at him with disdain. The staff looked at him with disappointment. Even the security guard by the door avoided his eyes when he finally dropped his badge onto the counter. The sound was small, but it felt like the final nail in his career. Angela took her envelope of cash calmly, sliding it into her bag. She looked at him one last time, her expression unreadable. Not cruel, not smug, simply steady. As though he was no longer worth her energy. You should remember, she said softly, that respect costs nothing. But losing it will cost you everything. The words landed like a final verdict. The regional director nodded at the guards. Escort him out. And just like that, the man who had once sneered and dismissed her was led out of the bank. His career and reputation in tatters. The customers broke into murmurs again. Some clapped quietly. Others shook their heads in disbelief. A few even approached Angela, thanking her for standing her ground. You showed him, one woman whispered. You showed all of us. Angela gave a polite nod, but she didn't linger. She wasn't interested in applause or spectacle. She had come to do something simple, withdraw her money. And she had done it despite the obstacles placed in her way as she walked toward the glass doors. The eyes of the room followed her. Phones were still raised, capturing her exit. Knowing the story would spread beyond these walls, beyond this city, and behind her, the bank staff stood shaken. Realizing they had just witnessed the fall of a man who believed arrogance was stronger than truth. For Angela, the consequences had only begun. For the bank, the storm was only starting. But for the manager, the story was already over. The glass doors closed behind Mr. Thompson with a hollow thud. Only minutes ago, he had strutted across the lobby with the arrogance of a man who thought he controlled the room. Now he walked out with his shoulders slumped, his face pale. And his badge gone. The guards escorted him toward the curb, but in truth, no force was needed. His strength had already left him. Each step he took felt heavier, as if the weight of the eyes inside the bank still pressed down on his back. Customers stood by the windows, watching, some recording as he stumbled outside. His name, his face captured forever. A few passers beyond the street slowed their steps, curious about the scene. They saw the defeated manager being led out, his tie crooked, his expression broken. Phones were lifted again, pictures snapped, whispers carried. In the digital age, shame travels faster than fire. Inside, Angela Carter remained still near the counter, her envelopes safely tucked away. She didn't follow him out, didn't watch his fall. She didn't need to. The damage was done, and she knew his downfall wasn't ending at the glass doors. It was just beginning. Mr. Thompson stopped outside, trying to regain some dignity. He turned toward the guards and hissed, "This is a mistake. They'll realize they need me." But his voice cracked, weak and desperate. The guards said nothing. They stepped back, leaving him alone on the sidewalk. Alone with the stares, the whispers, the pointed fingers. And then his phone buzzed. He pulled it from his pocket with trembling hands. A message flashed across the screen, termination effective immediately. HR will contact you. It was over. No meeting, no second chance, no defense. Just 3 cold words. Termination effective immediately. The manager's knees weakened. He sank onto the curb, ignoring the cars rushing past, ignoring the strangers filming him. His hands covered his face, but it was too late to hide. The world had already seen. Meanwhile, inside the bank, the regional director issued orders swiftly. "Clean this up," he told the staff. "Make sure Ms. Carter's account is properly flagged for priority. No mistakes again." His tone was sharp, almost fearful. He knew the fallout wouldn't end here. The company would face questions, investigations, and headlines. Angela listened, her face calm. She had no interest in the director's panic. To her, the matter was already closed. She had handled it in 1 minute, with nothing but steady words and quiet authority. But for Mr. Thompson, the nightmare only spread. By evening, the video clips were online. Millions watched him smirk at Angela, then watched his smirk crumble when the truth came out. Comments exploded. "This is what arrogance looks like." Imagine denying a CEO at her own bank. He ruined his career in less than 5 minutes. News sites picked it up, flashing his face alongside Angela's. The headlines were merciless. Bank manager fired after refusing black CEO's withdrawal. His name trended for all the wrong reasons. His arrogance had made him infamous. Calls poured into the bank's headquarters, angry customers demanding answers. People threatened to close their accounts. The company scrambled to do damage control, but the damage was already viral. Already permanent. That night, Mr. Thompson sat alone in his apartment. His tie was gone, his badge gone, his pride gone. The silence of the room was deafening. He replayed the moment over and over in his head, the smirk, the refusal, the cold words he had spoken, and the crushing realization that each one had led to his ruin. No amount of excuses could change what the world had seen. And the world never forgets. Angela, on the other hand, returned home quietly. She didn't post about it, didn't give interviews. She didn't need to. Her silence was power enough. She knew the lesson had already been written in the mind of every witness. Dignity does not beg. True authority does not need to shout. And as Mr. Thompson's downfall spread, that truth became sharper. His arrogance had cost him everything, while Angela's calm had given her more than she asked for: respect, admiration, and a story that would live far longer than any career. The manager thought he was testing her, but in the end, he had tested himself and failed. Asterisk, the sun had already dipped low by the time Angela Carter stepped out of the bank. The glass doors closed softly behind her, but the echoes of what happened inside were already spreading far beyond those walls. By now, videos of the incident were climbing across social media feeds, shared with captions filled with outrage, admiration, and disbelief. Angela didn't linger. She walked calmly to her car, the same steady stride she had carried into the bank earlier. She had come for one simple task, and though it had turned into something larger, she refused to let it rattle her. Her money was hers. Her dignity was hers. And most importantly, her silence had spoken louder than the manager's arrogance ever could. By the next morning, the story had already made headlines. News anchors replayed the video. A manager refusing a black CEO her own withdrawal, dismissing her proof, mocking her identity, then being fired on the spot. The clip of Angela's quiet words, "You're done here," played again and again, shared as a symbol of calm, power, and justice. Across the country, people reacted. Some cheered. Some reflected. Many felt the sting of recognition, remembering times when they, too, had been denied, disrespected, or dismissed. Angela's refusal to bow down became more than her own storiette, became a lesson for thousands. At her office, her employees greeted her with newfound admiration. "You showed us what leadership really looks like," one said. Another whispered, "You didn't have to raise your voice. That's strength." Angela smiled softly, but said little. For her, this wasn't about proving she was strong. She already knew that. It was about showing that true power doesn't need to roar. It simply stands, calm and unshaken, until the truth reveals itself. Meanwhile, at bay, the bank scrambled to recover its reputation. Press releases were issued, apologies drafted, training programs announced. They tried to convince the world that the problem was solved. But people weren't focused on the bank's words. They were focused on Angela's. Communities picked up the story. Schools used it as a lesson about dignity and prejudice. Companies shared it as a reminder of why leadership matters. Even parents told their children, "This is what it means to stand tall when someone tries to make you small." And then there was Mr. Thompson. The man who once sneered at Angela's ID now faced silence of his own. No job, no authority. Just a name tied forever to arrogance and downfall. His lesson was harsher, but it was real. Disrespect carries a cost, and that cost is everything. Angela, however, never gloated. She didn't post her victory online, didn't chase the cameras, didn't seek applause. She didn't need to. The story spoke for itself. Wherever she went, people carried it with them on their phones. In their conversations, in their hearts. One evening, as Angela left her office, a young woman approached her shyly. She was a bank teller from another branch, holding a notebook in her hands. "Ms. Carter," she said nervously, "I just wanted to thank you. We watched your video during training today. They told us never to judge a client by how they look, but to treat everyone with fairness. I'll never forget what you did." Angela smiled gently, resting a hand on the woman's shoulder. "Remember this," she said softly. "Respect costs nothing. But disrespect can cost you everything." The young woman nodded, her eyes wide, and Angela walked on. That was the true aftermath. Not the headlines. Not the firings. But the quiet shift inside people, the realization that dignity is not granted by others, but held by oneself. And when someone refuses to give it up, the world takes notice. Angela had walked into her bank to make a simple withdrawal. Instead, she had withdrawn something far greater, a lesson carved into the minds of everyone who watched. The moral was clear. Power doesn't always wear a title. Power doesn't always shout. Sometimes, power is simply the courage to stand firm, calm and steady when others try to push you down. And that lesson, unlike money, could never be taken away.